The structure of an essay on Of Mice and Men will generally look something like this, with an introduction first, and then the main body, and then of course the conclusion. Now the introduction, you're going to work from being quite broad, addressing the question as a whole and showing the examiner how focused you are, to narrowing it down, being quite specific and outlining what you're going to talk about in the main body. The main body itself is going to be the bit where you're going to pick up most of the marks. You're going to write in PQE, you're going to analyse the text, and you're going to constantly be focused on the question. And then in the conclusion, this is where you do the reverse of the introduction. You go from being specific to being quite broad and relating everything you've said back to the wider context of the novel. So let's look at what to put in an introduction a little bit more closely. I would divide an introduction into 4 sections, each of which you just speak for a sentence or so on each. First of all, you talk about the writer's intention in relation to the question. So your question, let's take a comment on the power of dreams in Of Mice and Men. So you're going to say the writer's intention, Steinbeck's intention, is to display the futility of dreams, the fact that dreams don't come true in 1930s America. Then you're going to start talking about the context. Well, why did he want to show that intention? And you'll talk about the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl, the financial crisis on Wall Street. And you're going to explain that all of these things combined together to create a very unstable America, where the propaganda that the American dream could exist for everyone was shown to be completely incorrect. And that's what Steinbeck was wanting to show, that people are pinning false hope on their dreams for a better life, when actually those dreams can't come true with just hope alone. Next, you're going to talk about the writer's methods, and this is things like using setting, imagery, characters. So in Steinbeck's case, you could talk about the fact that he uses foreshadowing to show the futility of dreams. He talks about the death of all these animals, the puppy, the mouse, and obviously Lenny is presented as an animal all the way through, so that kind of creates this idea that maybe he will die along with his dream. You could talk about the death of the water snake in the last chapter. So using the setting there is quite clever, because it again shows that the theme of death is reoccurring, and that the dreams will die just like Lenny. You could talk about the cycle structure of the novel. It begins and it ends in the same place. So it's this idea that there is no change in the lives of the characters. Everything goes on as before. It's the circle of life that this happens. There is no escape from their lives as such. And then lastly, and obviously, the characters themselves, and this leads us into the last little section. You would talk about which specific characters Steinbeck uses to portray this theme of dreams, and obviously the main ones we've got are George and Lenny, Candy, Curly's wife, and Crooks. So, saying that these are the characters who have dreams, and these are the main ways that Steinbeck portrays this theme of dreams, it makes sense, doesn't it, to divide your essay into those sections. We could do a section on George and Lenny because their dream is the same, and then we'd follow it with a section on Candy because he wants to join their dream. Then we could do a section on Curly's wife, and then lastly a section on Crooks. Obviously, we don't need to write the same amount for each section, because Crooks, for instance, he only has a dream for a very short period. Do you remember when they all come into his home and he momentarily says, "Oh, can I come and hoe your land?" And that's as long as his dream lasts. As soon as Curly's wife threatens to get him lynched and George says, "No, you can't," he then reverts to not having a dream. So what we'd write for him is probably a lot less than what we would write for George and Lenny, for instance, who live their entire lives by this dream. So, I'm going to divide my essay into these 4 sections. However, look at the question a second. It says, comment on the power of dreams in Of Mice and Men. So it's not good enough for me just to explain what the dreams of these characters are. I've got to address that other part of the question, the power of the dreams. So to do this, I've decided to split each section into talking about the good effects of those dreams on the characters, and then the bad effects of the dreams in the characters, to show that dreams can be powerful not just in a positive way, but they can also be powerful in quite a negative way as well. So let's take this section on George and Lenny, and I'll kind of guide you through an example, PQE, QE, QE, etc. So first of all, I'm going to say what the dream is, my point. Steinbeck conveys the power of dreams through his two main protagonists, George and Lenny. Their dream is to own their piece of land. That's my point done. Now my quote. Lenny remarks enthusiastically that they will, open speech marks, live off the fat of the land and have rabbits, close speech marks. That's my quote done. Now my E. This dream is very important to both characters, but for different reasons. For George, the dream gives him hope that a better life of independence and control is possible. For Lenny, the dream gives him happiness as he indulges his fantasy of owning and looking after lots of rabbits. So now I've outlined what the dream is, I can start to look at the power of dreams. I can really address that question. Firstly then, I'll look at the dream's positive power. The dream is a powerful one because it influences both characters positively, both in terms of their attitudes and actions, providing them a sense of hope for the future. George remarks, "We'd just live there, we'd belong there, there wouldn't be no more running around the country. No, sir, we'd have our own place where we belonged." Here we see that the dream has a positive power over George, as it provides him with the hope that one day he'll be free to have a place to belong and call his own. We know from our study of the context of the novel that this was a time when lots of young men travelled around farms, simply earning enough to live. They lived restless lives with no sense of a future, and obviously when you get to Candy's age, the reality of this is pretty scary when you realise that there's nothing left to live for. So this dream provides George with a sense of hope. So, now I've done one QE about how this dream is positive, I can do a second one to really back up my idea. However, I've got to remember that I need to link my second QE to what I've already said by using a connective, like additionally, furthermore, however, meanwhile, moreover, nonetheless, on the other hand, etc. So, furthermore, for Lenny, the dream also provides him a sense of hope, but not for freedom or control over his life, or a sense of belonging like George, but hope that one day he will get to tend his very own rabbits. Lenny is very careful to do everything in his power to make this dream come true, carefully obeying George's instructions not to talk to Curly's wife, saying, "George says I ain't to have nothing to do with you." So we see this dream is a method for George to control Lenny and make sure that he behaves well and doesn't do another bad thing like in Weed. So now I've talked about how the dream has a positive power over the men, so now it's time to consider the other side of the coin, the negative power. So I'll start my QE with another connective. However, their dream is also powerful in a negative way, it influences them. At the end of the novel, when Lenny kills Curly's wife, Lenny says, "I don't want to hurt you, but George will be mad if you yell." This is really ironic. Lenny tries to silence Curly's wife's screams because he's frightened that she'll get him in trouble with George, because after all he isn't meant to talk to her and he's just killed the puppy, so he's scared stiff that he won't get his dream. However, it's in his attempt to silence her that he actually ends up breaking her neck and killing her and the dream completely. So now I've done one QE, I can do another QE to really solidify my point that this dream can be negative. Again, I'm going to use a connective to link it to what I've already said. Additionally, when Curly's wife dies, George remarks softly, "I think I knowed it from the very first. I think I knowed we'd never do her. He used to like to hear about it so much, I just got to thinking maybe we would." Here we can see the negative influence of their dream. Yes, it offered them hope, but this hope was false, so therefore the disappointment of not achieving the dream feels even worse. Now I'd follow exactly the same format for the other characters. So for instance, Candy, I'd outline what his dream is, a quote to support it, then explain a little bit about how that dream has power over him, and then I'd split it into the two sections, the positive power that it has over him, a couple of QEs linked by connectives, and then the negative power it has over him, again a couple of QEs linked by connectives. Then exactly the same for the others. For Curly's wife, her dream obviously actually ostensibly, which means on the surface, is to be this film star, or it was initially, but actually I think her dream changes, doesn't it? Because she then dreams of just having attention, of having affection. So she's actually got two dreams at the same time. And then lastly, we've got Crooks and his dream of equality and acceptance. Now then, in your main body of your essay, you need to bear in mind the skills that you need to get an A grade. If we just look at this chart quickly, this is what you need to do to get a C grade. So in your E's, you will rephrase the quote and you explain what it means and how it proves your P. If you do that and just that, you will just get a C. In order to get a B, you need to rephrase the quote, explain what it means and how it proves your P, and analyse individual words. So you pick out a couple of words to look at, and you're going to talk about the literary devices that are used. Maybe alliteration has been used there. Maybe it's an oxymoron. Maybe it's a simile. You might look at the punctuation. You might say something like, oh, it ends in an exclamation mark, which shows that this character is shouting it. You might just comment on particularly emotive words. This particular word is a really powerful one to use because ... However, in order to get your A and in order to get your A star, you do all of that, plus you relate what you're saying to the novel's context and the writer's intention. So in this case, Steinbeck's intention is to show the futility of dreams, the idea that dreams cannot come true in the Great Depression. The American dream exists no longer. That's how to get your A grade. So then, this brings us to the conclusion. Now, here we're going to go from being specific to being nice and broad again. Remember, it's the opposite of the introduction. So we're going to start off by drawing together all of the specific things that we've said. We might begin our conclusion with a phrase like, as you can see, and we'll talk about the links that exist. So, as you can see, dreams are shown in the novel through a variety of characters. We've got George and Lenny's dream to own the land. We've got Candy's dream to join with them and become useful again. We've got Curly's wife's dream to be famous on one hand, but also to escape this life which is lacking affection and companionship. And then you've got Crooks's dream to be considered equal to the white men around him. And you'll probably draw the link that exists between, and obviously the link here is that none of these characters actually achieve their dreams in the end. Now, also in the conclusion, I think you should give your opinion. You could say you personally feel that a particular character's dream is more sympathetic. In my own opinion, I think Crooks's dream is really the most powerful one there, because it's the one that I think is most doomed to failure, even though they all are. But this is entirely up to you. It's your opinion on the dreams presented in the novel. And then lastly, this is the really important bit. You're going to sum up the importance of dreams in the novel, using the key words as well. So you might say something like, in the novel, dreams are shown to be one of the ways in which characters can combat the loneliness and helplessness of their lives. However, the fact that all of the dreams fail shows the tragedy of Steinbeck's novel, that in the time of the Great Depression in 1930s America, things were so bad that dreams were doomed to failure, and rather than giving a sense of hope or escape, they just meant that the terrible reality of marginalisation, racism, sexism and hopelessness seemed even worse.